some people are saying it's just that people didn't want the Tories. And fine, we'll take that. We're going to take it. We're going to run with it.
The Tories are out. We've got a new government, big majority. So yes, there is a sense of renewal. But I think a lot of that bright optimism will be questioned very, very soon.
I do think Keir Starmer may come to regret not having taken on Nigel Farage directly sooner. And you heard Farage's speech. He's going to go after Labour voters now.
Yes.
I think Labour are going to need a strategy.
Hello and welcome to the Political Forecast. It's the day after Election Day and it's happened. Keir Starmer is in Downing Street and he's made a couple of quite gripping speeches talking about the sunlight of hope. So we've got the Channel 4 News deck chairs out on the green in the rain. And it's altogether quite bizarre. But with me, a man I spent much of last night with, which is not something I say often, Kwasi Kwarteng, former Conservative Chancellor, Bell Ribeiro-Addy, who's just been re-elected. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And the psephologist from More in Common, Luke Tryl. Kwasi, are you able to set aside your natural scepticism?
Not really.
No.
I mean, I've heard it before. Do you know what the Prime Minister he reminds me most of is Theresa May. I mean,
Seriously?
When she came in, she talked about integrity.
Yeah.
She talked about public service. And believe
And
it,
the injustices.
injustices.
So there's no sense of a new dawn for you?
Well, look, I mean, clearly we were there for 14 years. I was involved in it. The Tories are out. We've got a new government, big majority. So yes, there is a sense of renewal. But I think a lot of that bright optimism will be questioned very, very soon.
Because Bell, I mean, you're a bit of a natural rebel. but today you're a believer.
Well, today I believe that we won all the seats that we did because that's what the Electoral Commission said. And, that really shows what people wanted. Some people are saying it's just that people didn't want the Tories. And, fine, we'll take that. We're going to take it, we're going to run with it, and we're going to do everything we can with it because obviously we don't want to spend another however many years out of government. And we understand that the next 5 years are going to be tough. People are not just going to, take us at face value. I think people are harder on the Labour Party than they are on the Tories more generally. I know you probably wouldn't say the same, but I think whenever we come into power, there's so much more expected of us because of the beliefs that we're founded on. Those socialist democratic principles that actually are about the 99%.
Let's just talk about Rishi Sunak's parting words. Because it was the classic thing, wasn't it, of a leader who is suddenly finding his ability to be authentic in his final moments. When the power drains, he can be generous, he can say that Keir Starmer's a decent man.
Yeah, I think so.
And suddenly you believe him in a way that you didn't believe him through the campaign.
Well, he had nothing to lose at that point. I mean, as you say, the power had drained.
But
away
your
from
natural instinct was, why didn't he fight the campaign like that?
Because he won't give. I don't think the public at that point were giving him the benefit of the doubt. Once he's on his way out, of course, people are listening to him.
But the public don't have to give you the benefit of the doubt for you to actually just start making the points you need to show them that you can be a good leader.
But he did finish strong, though. If you think about that final week, that last debate, he actually had a reasonably
And then he had to bring back Boris.
debate. But Boris.
But it was the style I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That last debate, he was good as a debater, but he was punchy. He was aggressive.
And I wish I'd seen that
he
before.
Was personal. You wanted that earlier on.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think the real story of last night is British politics splitting right, left and centre, right? You got that big Lib Dem vote, you got Reform, you got those so-called Gaza independents, the Greens. We are in a new era of politics. But I think what created that was that sense the country wants change. We're just not sure that anyone in the kind of mainstream traditional parties is going to give it. So lots of people opted outside of that. I think what Keir Starmer's going to have to do is recognise 35% of the vote. It's a third of the country. He's got a job to do to stabilise that coalition. Otherwise, he could find himself going the same way as Boris Johnson's 2019 coalition, just as quickly, if not quicker.
But also, he's not an island. A lot of the time, we put so much focus on leaders looking at whether they look like this or they look like that, exactly what they say. And actually, I would wonder, how much do people focus how they're going to vote specifically on who's in charge? I think it definitely plays a factor.
I think it's huge.
It's got to. But Keir Starmer is an island. He has a whole team behind him. Now 400 and, how many is it? 400 and something MPs.
14, yeah.
Yeah, 414 MPs, that's a whole lot. There's going to be so many different people with different jobs who will have their chance to make their cases to the public as well, and hopefully that's going to make a difference too.
But also worth remembering that Keir Starmer remains unknown to lots of the public. He's actually got a chance to define himself in office. We would have people literally in the last 2 weeks saying, Keir Starmer? Like, they genuinely didn't know who he was. He comes in at pretty much a blank canvas. So I think that's why these next 3 months are so important.
They are really important.
Because they will set, what do the public think of Keir Starmer? What do they think of his premiership?
Well, you look at what happened to Rishi Sunak. I mean, obviously, I was part of this very chaotic thing. I was sacked, the PM left. And then for about 2 or 3 months, Rishi Sunak had the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. There was a moment where people were willing to listen to him. They said, okay, there's been all this, chaos. But that went very quickly. That goodwill went very quickly. And I think this is a similar situation, actually. And that's what Labour are crafting it. They're saying, okay, look at all this chaos, look at all this mess. And they will have a goodwill period, but I think you'll be surprised how short that period is.
Well, actually, I think because we've had, and I agree, there will be a period of time. I don't think it's going to be that short, though. It's not going to be that short for us because after 14 years of everything that the Conservatives done, I think that people are going to give us a longer time to deliver, understanding how bad it's all been.
What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that I think they would have given you longer had you just been facing a denuded Tory party.
That's right.
I think the fact that there are now Reform, the Greens, the Independents means that there are other
Palestine,
people.
There's a whole bunch of
that
people.
means it has to be quicker because normally Tory brand trashed would take a while, as you say, 14 years. Now they've got all these alternatives, and that's why I think pace matters more than it might have not.
No, it absolutely matters because people are going to be impatient. As I said, people always expect more of Labour governments. I just think that we're going to be given a little bit extra time. I think people are going to be a bit more reasonable.
Let me just pick out 2 lines from the speech you just gave in Downing Street, which I found very striking. Maybe because I haven't slept. But they seem to be quite sort of effective. He said he wanted to end the era of noisy performance and tread more lightly on your lives. Who's that reaching?
Oh, I mean, that is reaching the public. They will say, after Brexit, the pandemic, Partygate, cost of living, mini budget, that whole period, they just want politics out of their lives. They want to be able to turn on the TV and not worry about what's happening in Westminster.
Is that what people really want?
They really do want that. They really
want?
Most people don't want to be engaged in politics. They genuinely are exhausted by it. They want a quieter politics and a Britain that feels like it works a bit more and is a bit less expensive. That's the baseline there.
Well, we've had too many scandals that take up a whole lot of time, and we're not actually dealing with the business of actually running the country.
Then why is everyone around politics obsessed with political charisma and performance and leadership?
Because I think it's more ambivalent than that. I mean, clearly someone like Farage, who got 15% of the vote, the media are fascinated by him. And you say it's worrying, but clearly there is... but clearly, you're demonstrating my point. Clearly there is an appetite for performance. I mean, that's what the guy is. He's a performer. And the media's fascinated by him. There were hundreds of people in Clacton who went to see him. It was a show. And I think Keir Starmer is doing well to distinguish himself from that. But there's still a huge number of people who want performers. They want to be engaged.
But what's the difference between saying, I'll be the person who doesn't do noisy performance, and Ian Duncan Smith's The Quiet Man of Politics, which is an absolute disaster.
It was a disaster.
And everybody laughed at it.
But when he did, that came at the end of his 2 years as leader, where everything had gone wrong.
Right. So it felt like an excuse.
It was absurd. I mean, I remember it at the time. There were constant conversations about how bad he was as a leader, and he said he was the quiet man. And that was a sort of disqualifying moment. If you're a bad leader and you're also a quiet man, what use are you?
Do you know, I think it's you guys, the media.
It's always on.
No. In terms of making people believe they need to be concerned about charisma and who's the leader and what their hair's looking like today. That's a lot of stuff that's just pushed out into the.
Is that true, Luke? I mean, because isn't it whenever you focus group people, they do talk about leadership. They do
talk about leadership, but I think what they like about Nigel Farage when people do like him is it's not just sort of charisma. It's this sense and people will say it, he tells it like it is. He's telling the truth. You know, he's not trying to hide who he is. He's authentic. So I think it's slightly different from charisma. It's authenticity.
Yeah,
and I think that's the challenge for Keir Starmer, because people have that instinctive, he's a lawyer, you know, he's quite put together. How can he demonstrate this is who he really is? You know, like when he does the football, people don't think he's a football fan, but he clearly is. But he doesn't cross, but how does he humanize himself? I think it's that more than being charismatic.
See, authenticity is the other word I have a slight problem with, because I don't know anyone who isn't really themselves in politics.
Well,
it's impossible to pretend to be somebody.
Do you know what? I think there's your
You're
work
not all the
self,
time.
and then there's your other self. I mean, you've been a politician. I'm sure there's some things that you would do at home that you wouldn't do at work. We just, and I think people, because of the media again, people want to see people being a bit more, as you said, human. But when they say human, they mean...
So, I mean, I give a contrast. You know, Boris was authentic. He didn't pretend to like football. He always said, I'm a rugby man. But then when leaders, I mean, in Keir's case, it's true, but a lot of leaders say, oh, well, you know, like David Cameron, do you remember when he got his football team right? That's inauthentic. If you say you're an Aston Villa fan one day and then you say you're a West Ham fan the next, that's inauthentic. And the problem that the public have is that too many people like me, politicians, are pretending to be what they're not in order to curry favour. That's the perception.
Maybe it's reality TV, I don't know.
That's the perception.
Because the other problem with promising to tread lightly on your lives is it might be a promise to not do very much.
Well, I think that would be the wrong thing to take from it.
I mean, I'm not saying...
But if it is that is bad. That, you know, it's a sort of, you know what they used to say about children, you know, children should be seen and not heard. I think that's the type of politics
I think
want now.
I think there's
them
something
getting on and delivering, which, because they felt the Tories were noisy, but not doing anything. They want the flip side.
And also, I mean, I was in the middle of the government at that time, and, you know, with Boris, Liz, less so with Rishi, they were always trying to immediately react to 24/7 news headlines. Always. And I think when he said, and it struck me actually, because I was part of a government that were trying to do things possibly too quickly. He said, it's not just like turning a switch. You've got to have a process, you've got to be steady. That was, I actually, that resonated with me because I recognise that. And I recognise, having been in government, that need to be just doing things the whole time and broadcasting what you're doing and seizing the agenda. There's a real culture of trying to do too much, too quickly.
Do you think, Bell, that Keir Starmer will try at least to resist being pushed into these, you know, roles and cliches, and will and you know, the ways people judge him? I mean, you know, his fans will say he was made for leadership, you know, and now we're going to see what he's really about because he's going to get on and he's going to change the country. I mean, do you believe he can do that, will do that, without being sucked into the inevitable news cycle and the demand for...
I think from his speech, he's certainly going to try. But because of the news cycle, because of what we're facing now in opposition in the House, 4 people from Reform, 4 people from the Greens, independents, we're going to be pulled in different directions. And I think that may cause some reaction. So there is a certain worry about that. But from what he's saying, he's going to try and stay the course. It's going to be
very interesting. I mean, you've got Farage, in Nigel Farage, you've got probably one of the best campaigners of his generation. I mean, that guy has a foghorn. You look at Brexit, you look at the banking scandal. And if he's in the House, it'll be interesting to see what issues he wants to make hay with.
I'm really, really worried about that. I know no matter which party anybody voted for, what we're looking at now is people to the extreme right in the House of Commons. And when we look at what's happened right across Europe, that's definitely changed a lot of the policies and the way in which people have behaved.
There's only 4 of them.
There's 4 of them, but one of them is Nigel Farage.
I think you underestimate. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
One of them is Nigel Farage.
But people can, you know, I mean, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, George Galloway. I mean, these guys can create a huge amount of
that's it. Think about what George Galloway was doing when he was in Parliament for how many months? Just a couple of months.
3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
But remember, like, Reform showed their ceiling in this election. Yes. They did slip back to 14% after those Ukraine comments, the racism scandals. So it shows there is a way. And I do think Keir Starmer may come to regret not having taken on Nigel Farage directly sooner. I know it was tempting to let him duke it out with the Tories at the moment, but there's no doubt, looking at those results, Reform took that some of those voters who abandoned the Labour Party in 2019, and you heard Farage's speech, he's going to go after Labour voters now.
Yes.
I think Labour are going to need a strategy, and it involves, I think, playing on that ceiling.
That's right.
What does it tell us then also about British voters that in these last days of the campaign, Nigel Farage, was scrutinised over what he thinks about Ukraine and Putin, and then his candidates face scrutiny over their attitudes on racism and homophobia and sexism.
Attitudes. They were being racist, Islamophobic and sexist.
And yet they got 14% of the vote.
Well, look,
what does that mean? Does that mean 14% of
No, it doesn't mean...
voters hold those attitudes or don't believe?
No.
What it means is that for 40%, they were so committed to sending a message to the political system
that they didn't care about
that they were willing to vote for Nigel Farage because they felt. They would say it's a few bad apples, for instance. They might say
he played. I know Nigel well. But he did play fast and loose. I thought his remarks on Rishi Sunak went on the D-Day. There are so many ways you could critique that, but his words were something like, he doesn't understand our culture and our values. And I thought that was just
that was disgusting.
Wrong. Do you know what I mean? I just thought, he could have said it was inappropriate of the Prime Minister to do this, or he shouldn't have done that. But the way he framed that, I thought was...
dog whistle.
Yeah.
Absolute dog whistle.
And I was upset about that. I know Nigel. I have some respect for his talent. But that was disappointing.
Yeah. And there were some other issues, let's not forget, that changed the votes in places. Gaza.
Yes.
No, well, that's what I was going to say. The flip side of this is that 4 Reform MPs, 6 MPs actually, who were very vocal about Gaza and Palestine, and unseated quite big figures in British politics. Now, obviously, the media in general is going to bang on about reform a lot more because of the impact reform have had on the Conservative vote. But in terms of what the people delivered in terms of their votes, they delivered more MPs who care about Israel-Gaza than they did about people who care about immigration.
What you have to remember that our voting system played a massive role in how all of these things happened. Remember 2019, for example, the Conservatives didn't get a greatly huge more share of the vote.
We had compared to the Labour this year.
No. The Tory vote did not go up much in 2019. Labour's vote went down. It went to smaller parties. If we were looking at a first-past-the-post system and issues like this play a role, you're always going to end up with some very bizarre results,
I agree with
which
that.
is what I thought happened. So, some people are not necessarily got the confidence of the majority of that area, but because of a range of parties in the first-past-the-post system, other people are going to get pushed up, and they end up being the MP.
I think it would be a mistake for Labour, though, to attribute what happened purely to Gaza and Muslim communities, because we would speak to Muslim voters and they would basically say they feel taken for granted by the Labour Party. And what it reminded me of was speaking to Red Wall voters who left the Labour Party, and Brexit was the trigger, but it was because they felt neglected by the Labour Party. I think you're seeing a similar thing with some Muslim voters. Gaza is the trigger, but there is a deeper sense that Muslim voters have felt neglected, taken for granted.
Absolutely, but I also wouldn't attribute Gaza purely to Muslim voters.
Oh, no.
In my area, I have white middle-class people talking to me about the issue of Gaza and how they're disappointed about that. And even in areas like my own, where I voted for a ceasefire because of different things, some different things that have been said in terms of the Labour Party position, which is now for a ceasefire, I might add, some people did not want to vote.
No. But just talking about the product of our voting system.
Yeah.
You don't want proportional representation.
No, but I can see that there are anomalies. I'm a Conservative, so I think this is a system that broadly works, and I would stick with it. But there are anomalies. You mentioned the fact that we got 44% last time. We got a majority of 80. Labour will have got 34% this time, and a majority of 178, partly because, or 74, because the other parties are split. And I've said this before. I'm old enough to remember the 1983 general election. And this was our version of it, in the sense that in 1983, SDP and Labour were split. The Tories got 144 majority. That was Thatcher's heyday. Now, the centre-right split, and Keir, on 34% of the vote, don't forget, has got 174 majority.
Because if we did have proportional representation, we'd currently be in coalition talks.
That's right.
God.
And that is not what the country would want.
That's right.
No, I think that would further the sense of chaos even
would
more.
be mad, yeah.
I think the public, it's slightly paradoxical, despite only 34% of the country having voted for Labour government, I think the public have still broadly got the result that they
That's
wanted.
right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
I think
no, I agree with that. There are even some people who didn't vote Labour knowingly saying, I know Labour are going to win in this area,
there was
and I
that.
support that, and I want us
So
to have a Labour government. And it's a very bizarre way to do things,
That's
in
right.
my view, but that's what they did.
That was the because we had all this polling. I mean, Luke and I were discussing this. The polling, I think, drives voting. You could see Labour were
It
going
does.
to win.
I was so worried about the polling.
And then people think, well, actually, they're going to win anyway, so I can vote for whoever I want.
Yeah, I was so worried about
Well,
the
look, at time of recording, we're in sort of day one. Nothing much has happened yet.
Well-
nothing's been announced. You know, 1997 they'd announced Bank of England independence and goodness knows what else by now. So let's look ahead with our traditional
The
1 minute
removal
look ahead.
bans haven't come yet, have
Let's
they?
just say to the next week. What's going to happen in the next
Well,
week?
he's got to appoint the government. He's got to appoint the cabinet.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if there weren't one or two surprises in terms of allocating the jobs. I'm not entirely convinced that everyone who's doing a shadow portfolio will get the cabinet jobs, but let's see.
Why are you not sure?
Yeah, why?
Well, I just think that, the last minute creases when you make up a government, there might be conflicts of interest that arise. There are all sorts of things that can happen. So it'd be very interesting to see actually who are in the places. In 90% of the cases, I'm sure there'll be the same people,
Yeah.
but I'm interested in that.
What's your prediction for the week ahead?
Well, we do, as I said, you have to appoint the government. And I think there will be some announcements. There's been all this talk about us having to extend our sitting time an extra week so we can deliver a bit more before we go off for summer. I think that's really important. But once all those people are in place, I think we are going to hear a few things because I think everyone understands that people are impatient for change and we need to tell them something. We can't leave them until September.
Luke?
So we had 50% of people said they voted Labour because of the NHS. They also ranked that as Rishi Sunak's biggest failing when we polled them. So I would be shocked if there weren't an announcement about the NHS within the next week, because that is core to meeting those voter expectations.
Thank you all very much indeed. That was first political forecast of the new government. Until next time, bye-bye.